Groundbreaking, earth-shattering, meta-game-changing. These are just some of the words that I have used to describe OTAs in Marvel Snap. Interestingly, they actually do kind of apply to this one, but not in the way that you'd think. This is kind of two OTAs. There's the normal game balance OTA, and then there's like this whole other thing that is happening in this OTA that is definitely worth talking about. So it is one of the more unique and weird OTAs that we've ever seen. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I've started doing these pitches at the beginning of the video now. So remember, if you like my content, please like and subscribe. I really, really appreciate it. It helps the channel grow. Talking about the actual changes that have happened here, though, Victoria Hand going to 2-2 feels maybe the longest overdue change that we've had in Marvel Snap for a very long time. When you compare her to the other things in her lane, I think especially the Patriot comparison just kind of makes her look terrible. Like, this is a very straightforwardly powerful card that is frankly easier to use with the cards that go with it than Patriot cards are. The cards that go with it are better. There are more ways to multiply this effect. At 2-3, it was just like, okay, well, there's literally no reason for this card to be a 2-3. Now, Victoria Hand is very rarely problematic in a game sense. She shows up every so often and becomes the best deck by virtue of how well certain cheap tech cards are doing in the context of the metagame. This most recent time, of course, being the Deafening Chord and Shadow King Victoria Hand deck. But she's not, like, oppressive per se, so much as it's just like, yeah, I mean, the numbers on this card are probably too high. And hitting the cool part of this card would be hitting the buff, so don't do that. So just make the actual card itself just a little bit worse on rate. So those games where you're not investing in her synergy as highly, where you aren't frigging her, she's just a little bit worse. I think that's a very valid nerf, and I would call it pretty overdue. I think this one's a little less valid. Like, I get it, right? Clearly the V-Hand deck was an outlier in data, and that's not particularly surprising. It's been either the first or second deck on my tier list for like a month now, basically since Deafening Chord came out. And that's real, and I get it, but I don't know that Quinjet needed to get a point of power knocked off it as well. I'm guessing that the indicator here is there are two nerfs to the same deck. That deck was probably really, really strong in their data, and I buy that. It's just, I think that Victoria Hand's strength is so often contextual that she is a very powerful card, but her synergies are not enough to carry her deck in every matchup, and her deck is so predicated on having access to good and cheap tech that I don't think Quinjet is a necessary nerf, when what will actually most of the time happen is the tech becomes less relevant against the metagame, and she becomes worse by the nature of it. To me, this feels like a step too far, or like the kind of nerf that I would consider reverting once the metagame shifts away from SK Deafening Chord being really important to it, which it's already starting to do. All right, let's get into the patch within a patch here. This and other vanilla cards are finally being updated to reflect the actual state of the game. And I think this is a very important and good thing to actually get done. Misty Knight going to 1-3. I think that what that does mostly is provide a baseline for what one-cost cards are at. It means that you can put more stats on one-cost cards. Marvel Snap's failures, in my opinion, at making 1- and 6-cost cards are pretty apparent in recent years, where you can really notice like 1, 5, and 6 are where they struggle to figure out what a viable stat line is the most. And I think that's because there's just not enough room at 1 to do a lot with it, because when you have like your vanilla being set at 1-2, putting something at 1-1 is starting it at half the power of a vanilla. That's really hard to do. When you have something set at 1-3, there's just fundamentally more granularity in it. Like, this is your new baseline for a one-cost card. That means that now when you make a 1 with a downside, it can be a little bit bigger. It means when you make a 1 with an upside, it can be a little bit smaller, and that's a meaningful nerf to that card. It's the kind of thing that it's really a lot easier to make a 1-drop when you have more space and more options for what you can do with the other number on the card. This is probably the place where Marvel Snap suffers the most from lacking like power toughness that you see in games like Hearthstone and in things like Magic the Gathering, because that extra number on the card means you can differentiate between, say, a 1 power card with 4 toughness, a 2 power card with 2 toughness, that kind of thing, both of them can cost 2. In Marvel Snap, there's not enough nuance there, and I think just adding more numbers that can go on a 1-cost card is quite important. Shocker up to 2/4. This one, I think, was already sort of, like, we know this is kind of already a thing, because we have, like, 2/4 Invisible Woman, things like that. It does mean that that stuff is no longer out of line, but 2 is a cost where this is actually, I think, pretty important, because 2, more than anything else, the vanilla curve really hasn't changed for 2s. Like, yeah, there's a couple of 2/4s with upside, but most of the good 2s are going to be just 2/3s, and there's not really, like, any 2/7s running around right now. Sometimes there are, depending on how you want to parse it, but, like, Wild Child, for example, looks like a 2/9, not necessarily the easiest thing to activate. In a world where cards like that exist, it makes more sense to have this at 2/4. Again, the granularity is pretty important, because to me, 2s are quite a boring space to exist in, because every 2 is like, here's my 2/3 that also does something cool. Oh, look, it's Merlin. Oh, look, it's Kate Bishop. You know, like, oh, okay, I get it. It's a 2/3 that does, all right, 2/3 with upside, cool, I get it, that's a good card. Having more ability to change those cards around. Like, now, for example, you could argue a 2/3 stat line is below average, which it isn't when you actually look at the totality of 2s, but below at least Shocker. That's pretty important too. Perhaps the place where this power creep has become the absolutely most evident is 3. Cyclops goes to 3/5, and it's just like, yeah, he's still terrible. Like, it's just still totally bad. It's worth talking about in the context of buffing all these vanilla cards. We got to talk about high evolutionary a little bit, right? Cyclops at 3/5 with a high evo thing is pretty important. The premise of high evolutionary, when it was a good deck and you just played all the evo cards, was largely one that it had the best value 2-drops, not 2-drops, value 3-drops, value 6-drops, and value 1-drops. Like, it just, those were the best versions of them. And as power creep has gotten more notable, which is just kind of a thing that happens in card games, the product is a card, and if you're selling something, somebody to something to somebody even, you want the thing to be a satisfying experience, which often means that it's probably going to be a pretty good card. You can't just sell people vanillas, but that is largely to say that even at 3/5 with the evo ability, I don't know that Cyclops is all that good. I think it gets a lot closer to if you have Misty Knight, if you have Evo Hulk, if you have Cyclops being like, these are just the biggest guys now, but I'm not sure that's actually necessarily true. Speaking of Evo Hulk, that's a 6/14 now. So is normal Hulk, but you're probably only going to see him in Evo. This is a notable buff to the card. I think it's important that this being the new vanilla does sort of recontextualize some of the cards that were designed with the old vanilla breakpoint of 12 in mind. Like Magneto, for example, has long been a card that was, in a sort of absolute sense, overstated. It's Hulk, but better. And I don't think they realized just how much better or how good that ability was when they made Magneto, or they probably wouldn't have given him vanilla stats in the first place. Anyway, now he no longer has vanilla stats. Now you look at something like Galactus First Steps, and it's not just Hulk plus. I think that's probably good. Of the changes they made, this is actually the one that is, like, by numbers the largest, and by percentage it's not the largest. That would of course be Misty Knight, but I do think this is meaningful in the context of the other cards that exist at the 6-cost spot. This really puts Evo Hulk more back into contention with that Galactus First Steps type stuff. It probably doesn't necessarily get it there, but it really does a lot in comparison to the cohort of cards that were designed with vanilla stats with an upside. 6 and 2 are kind of the stat lines where you see the most vanilla stats with an upside type card. Oh, it's a 6/12 with an ability. Oh, it's a 2/3 with an ability. And so those are the places where I feel like these changes are probably the most impactful. The reason they're not as impactful as 3 is because 3s have already gotten to the point where it's more than vanilla stats and an upside. Like, 3s were already like 3/5s with upside. You know, like, that was already kind of the deal there. Not the Colossus buff many people that I've seen have been asking for, but is still a Colossus buff, just sort of recognizing, look, this needs to be a card that is vanilla plus. This is a French vanilla card, if you pardon the borrowing of another Magic expression, which is also where I borrowed vanilla from. This is not going to change anything about what Colossus is, but I am happy for Colossus that they didn't forget about him when they buffed Shocker. This one actually might matter. Like, when we talk about French vanilla cards, French vanilla draw a card and have that upside built in, a lot better than whatever Colossus has going on. I don't hate 2/4 Cable. I think this is like a pretty, like, in a deck where I'm playing Lizard, I kind of think I might look at Cable. Like, I really like the value of 2 points versus a card. Very different from the value of 3 points versus a card. You could actually probably talk me into this guy. I do think it's crazy that they did like a vote on a variant thing of which one of the cards was Cable. Cable lost the vote on a variant, and then they buffed Cable. That's criminal. Like, I think people might go back in time and actually pick Cable if it turns out that they were actually going to be play the card. Then again, Jean Grey won that variant thing, and nobody gets to play her, so, you know. Iron Fist getting a buff. People might think this is a little bit weird, honestly, but this, to me, is one of the least played move cards. Like, just generally, it's not necessarily that it's bad or anything, it's just that we have a lot of better options for one-cost move right now. And those better options have made old Danny Rand feel a little bit out of place. And I think that getting him up to 1/3 makes a lot of sense because, especially in the new player experience, you don't want people looking at this and being like, why am I playing a worse card to get a move ability, given how awkward move can be to learn for new players? You want them to feel good about the things they're doing. In as much as this is a boost to move at a high level, the only place I can think of it being important is move bounce, but it does matter there, and every point counts there. I can see that being a good thing to do if you're a big fan of the move archetype. Move bounce does actually play this card. Most other move decks are typically not in that business. So that is relevant, but I do think that largely this is a change aimed at the new player experience in reflection of the recent changes to Misty Knight. Airwalker getting a point of power kind of reminds me of when Negasonic got a point of power and it blew up both cards. Old Negasonic was, after the buff, a 3/5 that blew up herself and the other card. It was pretty unplayable because what was the point of it getting extra power if what you were doing with the card was blowing it up anyway? And that's sort of the exact same critique I have of Airwalker here. What is the point of Airwalker getting extra power if the whole point of playing Airwalker is to blow it up anyway? And I realize, there's going to be situations where, like, you have nothing else to do and you play an Airwalker for stats. Okay, you've buffed the card in a small percentage of the times that you're going to actually play it. That is not enough for a card as bad as Airwalker. It needs way more love than that. And I just think that this is wheel spinning in terms of how this buff is going to actually play out. This one's weird to me. Master Mold going up to 2/3, which, I mean, it is now below the vanilla curve. It's probably fine for Master Mold to be a 2/3. The only reason this is weird to me is because, I guess, okay, it's weird to me from a game dev perspective, in as much as I'd like to flatter myself and think that I have one. I just don't think that this is the kind of card you'd want to be making stronger. My instinct is that this kind of card you kind of want to stay at like a kind of bad but fun enough to play. I guess the argument would be twofold. First, that at 2/2 in the new world where everything is a 2/3 or a 2/4, it's like wildly unplayable. And you don't want it to be wildly unplayable, you just want it to be like not good enough that this becomes a common play pattern. The second is, it just makes way more sense for Master Mold to be a 2/3 from like a flavor perspective because it's a Sentinel and all the Sentinels are 2/3s and like it should be a 2/3 and like, yeah, okay, I think that's the most compelling argument for me is just like, that's just what this number should be. And now we have the freedom to actually make this number anything. And frankly, when I look at this, I don't really see a risk of Master Mold being oppressive or anything like that. So I guess it's probably fine. But the thing about this card that is notable to me is just, I would not want, if I were a game dev, for this to be any part of the metagame. It's just something that you don't really want to be a big thing. It's kind of clog-ish, right? Like, people even call the deck hand clog. It's, the similarities are noted. The goal is to limit your opponent's options in ways that prevent them from enjoying the game. And that is fine to have as long as it is not the best thing to do, which is always why I feel like you should probably be reticent to buff cards like this. Long story short, though, I don't think this is enough to make it not that, so I guess you might as well keep it. at 2-3. Like, it's probably still going to be bad. This is actually kind of nuts. Like, this card's quite good. I think this is one of the more underrated cards in Marvel Snap. I really, really do. And I think that you might look at this and you say, oh, well, they're just buffing it up to where it was, which is 1 point below the vanilla stat line. And to that, I would say it's not actually the vanilla stat line until there are enough cards at that stat line, right? Joaquin Torres is not really competing with Shocker. You know, it's not really competing with Invisible Woman. Joaquin Torres is competing with, and often in synergy with, Merlin or Iron Patriot and things like that. And those cards are still 2/3s. So this is, to me, a very interesting choice. I think this card is a sleeper. I think Joaquin Torres is already pretty good. And with a buff of 1 power, even in the new context of the new world, I think this card is better. And I think there will probably be ways to make this card do stupid things once people start really looking back at him. I think this is a legit good card that got a buff for maybe no reason. Like, it's definitely one of those cards that I could see potentially being nerfed in the future. Like, I really do think there is eventually going to be something that makes this card quite stupid. And the Hunger did a pretty good job of that before Shadow King ruined that whole entire metagame. But this is a legitimately interesting card. And I think when you look at, like, the 2s people are playing, a couple of cards got notably worse in comparison. I think, you know, the standard is still probably 2-3, but the lower you go, the worse it is, right? So like a 2-1 like Surge is really awkward now, I think. This card, at getting that buff, like, I feel like if it were me, I would have left it at 2-2. This is pretty interesting, and I'm not going to say go out there and go buy Joaquin Torres. Buy. You got to go stonks Joaquin Torres stonks. But I think this is kind of a mistake. Wade Wilson's buff is getting bigger, which I think is still totally fine, but does actually make him a more valuable, consistent C piece for a Deadpool deck. I don't know exactly how you're meant to build him, but there is a number where that plus becomes like, oh, yeah, no, that's just really, really sick, and I'm really, really happy to do that most of the time. I've seen him being run in various Dormammu-type stuff, and Dormammu-type stuff has gotten notably better, in my opinion, but it's still not necessarily all the way there. I don't know if there's a Deadpool-only build of Destroy. I think that you probably want another Wade Wilson-type effect before you get to that point. But I do wonder about, say, Deadpool, Headpool. I will say, the biggest problem with this card is not the number on it, it's hand or deck, which is good in the sense that you're never going to knock at the Deadpool if that's what you're doing. But it's bad in the sense that if you run multiple ones, and you really want to pull one, and the other one's like a fallback, it's not always going to pull the other one. I don't know. I just think that, like, that is the worst feeling part about this card for me. Doom 2099 to 4/5, I think, is sort of the safe option for buffing this card. Like, yeah, okay, you know, you didn't feel like it was safe to buff the Doom bots. I get it. I get it. But I am interested in this card. Like, it's notable to me that Ramp is running around with, I would argue, probably a bit of a sub-old Doom 2099 point level. Like, I think old Doom 2099 decks existed in a very similar space to Ramp decks, which is not to say they were, like, unbeatable or anything. It was just like, here's a bunch of points. It's, like, fairly telegraphed. I'm not really doing a lot of thinking about it. I think that the number of points for old Doom 2099 decks wasn't actually that far off and probably was a little bit higher than some of these Ramp decks. And the fact that they're willing to buff Doom 2099 himself so much and so totally unwilling to buff the scaling part of the card, I think demonstrates where the real power in this card actually exists. The power in this card is lots of spread points across lots of locations. That is not necessarily what he's able to do right now because of how much they've nerfed the Doom bots. And so this 1 point of power does way less than 1 point of power on a Doom bot would by a pretty aggressive margin. It does make it the kind of card I'd look at including in RSM again, though, but I'm not sure it does enough to distinguish itself outside of that. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. I hope you enjoyed this patch within a patch. It's a very, very weird one. A lot of things going on here. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.